wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast. This week we're rejoined by Michael Tremblay. Before we get to the show, I'd like to invite you to support the show by going to Patreon, www.patreon.com/SundayStoic. Your help is greatly appreciated. Michael is a PhD student at Queen's University, where he is working on a thesis titled Theory and Training in Epictetus' Program of Moral Education. He also has a bachelor's and master's degree in philosophy from Carleton University. Michael is also an accomplished Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner as well as a wrestler. So I think we all have a lot to learn from Michael, and I wanted to have him on to talk about the dichotomy of control, something that he feels we often misinterpret in Stoic philosophy. And seeing as how it is a foundational cornerstone of practice of Stoicism, I think it's pretty important that we have a firm grasp of what the dichotomy of control truly is. Michael Tremblay, welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast for the second time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be back.
Yeah, how are things going with your PhD studies?
It's good. So I'm writing my dissertation on Epictetus and his kind of program of moral education. So I'm finishing that up, and I'm looking to defend in the next couple months and applying to jobs and hopefully, teaching somewhere or moving to a different school to continue researching next year.
Oh, that's exciting. So defense in a few months. So are you approaching that with a stoic attitude, like I got this, or we can talk about that later, I guess. The dichotomy of control versus what's in our power to influence and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything stressful works well in that. I mean, for the defense, I'm just thinking of it. So for those that don't know, when you finish your PhD, I haven't done it yet. You would have a better idea, but you basically go in and defend this work in a room full of, really smart people and experts in the subject. And if if they like it, you pass and you get your degree if it reaches a certain level of standard. But for me, I'm kind of looking at it like a great opportunity because you do this research, especially academic research, it's not always accessible. It's not always read by a lot of people. So more just looking at it as an opportunity to just discuss Stoicism for 3 hours in a room of people that have to be interested in it and talk about it. So,
do you do a public presentation before the defense?
Not to my knowledge. I know some people do that. I think, but I think we might just dig into it.
Okay, great. Well, the reason I brought you on is I thought about talking about a paper that you recently authored, or a blog post essentially that you recently authored. But I thought, wow, I might be able to actually just get the author to talk about it instead of me just interpreting what you wrote. And the piece appeared on the Modern Stoicism blog. It's called "What Many People Misunderstand About the Stoic Dichotomy of Control." And I thought it was just really interesting because I think you mentioned that even yourself when you try to deep dive into Stoicism, if you're thinking about it the wrong way, it can lead to confusion. And I think I have felt like a failure and been a little confused when maybe I'm actually thinking about the dichotomy of control in a way that maybe doesn't reflect what the Stoics meant when. I mean, they never used that phrase for one, but when they talked about what we call the dichotomy of control. So first of all, you mentioned that it's the dichotomy of control is kind of a gateway for a lot of people, and for some it's as far as they go into Stoic philosophy. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the dichotomy of control really simply, as it's presented, is this idea that there's two types of things in the world. There's the things that you control and the things that you don't control, or at least that's how it's sometimes represented. And, Stoicism just provides this insight, this really simple insight that you should focus on the things that are up to you, both because, that's going to be more effective. So there's almost like there's a effectiveness reason, like that's the stuff that you can actually change and help. And then there's a psychological or emotional reason, which is that most of your distress and frustration is going to come from either focusing on things that you can't control or confusing things, treating things that aren't up to you, like how someone else thinks about you,
Mhm.
like it is up to you.
Sure.
And then thinking that it's somehow your fault if they have this perception, not like they're their own person, coming up to that. Um, so I kind of look at Stoicism. There's kind of a couple different levels to it, and on a first level, there's kind of this life hack level, and some people, I know some people can criticize that, but I think that's great depending on the level you're trying to approach it in. If you read a bit about Stoicism and you walk away and you keep your value system, but you pick up some things that help your life, that's great. That's like I think that's a successful engagement with philosophy. And so the dichotomy of control is really popular on that life hack level. It's something you could explain in 10 minutes and it helps. And it's something that's also applicable. It's to be applied constantly. And it also graphs on, I think, importantly, onto any kind of value system or many value systems if you don't look at it deeper. It's just something, no matter what you're attached to, even if you're attached for the pursuit of money, you see this thing of like entrepreneurs, which is like not very stoic to be
Right.
obsessed about getting money, but they're like, oh, I can make money more effectively if I focus on what's up to me and what I have control over. So it's this thing that can graph onto kind of any value system. And I think in a way that's great, but I think because it exists and it's very popular in that kind of life hack domain, when you dive deeper into Stoicism, you get some false impressions or some misrepresentations of what that theory means that can kind of hold you back or be more confusing as you try to dig in deeper.
Yeah, you mentioned that. You mentioned that when you dig deeper, it can cause confusion, and in the article, and I have run across that before, and I have come up with my own interpretations of why that is. My thought was, for example, and we can get into this more in a moment, but learning how to apply control, let's call it for now, is not so much an on-off switch, but like a dimmer switch. You start with a little bit of skill and you're working on improving it, but sometimes you can feel like you're failing when you read it and you think, I should be able to control my emotions now. Boom. I know logically that it's what makes sense logically. It is what wisdom tells me that it should be possible. Therefore, I should be able to do it. But just knowing that something should be a certain way or is a way does not necessarily mean we have the skill set developed and the patterns and the habits to actually be an expert at it.
Yeah. So building on that, what Stoicism tells us we can control. I was looking at Epictetus specifically because he's the one who really uses this the most,
Right.
at least in the writings that remain. He says, what's up to us is, our judgments, the way we make use of impressions, or the way we make use of the information we receive about the world, our emotions, our choice. And so we're told that these are, up to us or in our control, whatever definition or translation you want to use right now. And I think what you experience is a similar thing I experience is like, okay, I've learned that, I believe that, or at least I really want that to be true. And I've also learned some Stoicism, which tells me like, it shouldn't matter to me if this person insults me, or it shouldn't matter to me if this thing doesn't go the way I want it to, but yet I'm still upset by it. And then you feel like, you hit the nail on the head. You feel somehow like you're a failure, or somehow like you're failing Stoicism, or that can be if it's self-applied, which I did because I had a lot of faith in Stoicism. And then I think you can push back and say, well, this is just stupid. This was just wrong then, because clearly I don't control it. So you can either be upset with yourself or upset with the theory.
Right.
But the point of the article is the point that that's a misunderstanding of what it's trying to communicate. And a lot of that tension comes from not really getting at what Epictetus was trying to say.
Okay. So first of all, we call it the dichotomy of control. And you mentioned that it's not really about control at all. Could you, so that's kind of a paradigm shift then for a lot of us who think of it that way. So how should we approach this idea? If it's not about control, what is it about?
Yeah, so the main idea of the post was that there's just no word for control there, right? So control is being added in an English translation to try to graph on or make sense of the idea. And the argument is that it's kind of a bad way of making sense of the idea. And I go into it further because when we think of control, we think of it in two main ways, which are either I can immediately determine, right now the way something is, or I can, I think the other one I had there was like strongly influence.
Strongly influence, yeah.
Yeah, and neither.
When you read like Bill Irvin's book, he talks about focusing on what you're part of, what you can strongly influence, or like when he goes into his trichotomy. We won't go down that road today, but
yeah.
but yeah, it's the things you can influence right now that are theoretically purely yours to control, and the things that you have a heavy influence on, like you can name, playing wrestling, let's say, giving it your best shot. So how is it not, what is it if it's not control that the Stoics are advocating here?
Yeah, so the Greek itself, I argue, translates into like up to us, which is not very helpful, right? So it's the things up to us, and that's not as catchy. It's not as accessible. So then I try to dig into a bit and explain what up to us means. And up to us means, I argue, and I think this is the case, is that it's about causal, it's about causality. It's about the things that you cause. And in that sense, it's also about a kind of responsibility, and not just a responsibility. We can think of, I'm responsible for things that I immediately do, but the Stoics had kind of a grander sense of responsibility where you're responsible for things that are a result of you. So the Stoic thing is there's some things that you cause, there's some things that are a result of you. What are a result of you and your character are the choices you make, the emotions you have, the way you make sense of information. That's a result of you. Things that are not a result of you are, what other people think of you, your physical health, the condition of your possessions. And so then we say, well, what does this mean? Causation, causality. And a way they try to flesh it out is, and Epictetus talks about this. It's something that can be, if something can be externally restrained, prevented, influenced, or not influenced, but like caused by something outside of you, then it's not up to you, right? So if I want to try my best, that's up to me. Whether or not I win is not up to me, because a very big part of that, my winning can be constrained by the injury. I'm using sport analogy because I wrestle, but it can be constrained by the fact that I broke my leg a week ago.
Sure.
Be constrained by the fact that the other person I'm wrestling against is much better than me. So just this position of what you cause and what you're responsible for. And I don't know if we want to stick with that or go off on another tangent, but the innovation to that is that what you're responsible for is much different than what you have immediate control over, right? So you're responsible for the character or the results of your character, right? You caused your anger, your outbursts, your ignorance, but that's up to you in a sense. But that's not something you have immediate control over. That's something that's the culmination of a lifetime of habits and experiences and events. And that I think is the most important clarification between control and something being up to you.
So if I can try to do what I do in the classroom and analogize,
great.
Let's see if I'm getting it or not. This is why it's important to have you on the show so I don't screw this up. If I think of the things that are in my power, let's say, if we use that translation, let's put it in the context of the Stoic garden. We're trying to grow our good character. Think of what the sage would look like. His garden would be, his or her garden would be beautiful, right? And I'm starting with kind of a messed up looking garden here, but I can't just make it beautiful overnight. I'm cultivating this over time. It's not in my power to have the garden now, but I can be working towards the garden. Is that kind of a way to think about it, to cultivate these traits or these?
I think that's great. And then, so the garden, right, is up. The quality of the garden is up to you. When we say, why do you have a good garden or why do you have a bad garden? The Stoic's going to say, well, it's up to you. It's up to the choices and the behaviors and the decisions you made as a gardener. Your character is a result of your choices, your decisions, your habits, and your behaviors. Now, as you pointed out, right, if you have a bunch of weeds, you can't just snap your finger and those are gone. That's going to take time to clear those and to plant other types of things that will grow. So being frustrated with yourself that like, well, I know I should be a good person and I can't immediately do it. Or I know, I shouldn't care what other people think, or I shouldn't get angry easily and I can't immediately do it. There's no problem with that. The Stoics totally understand that. The garden takes time to cultivate. But at the end of the day, it's also your responsibility. And it's also a result of your choices. And I think that's for me, that's a helpful realization in terms of not being as hard on myself as I progress as a Stoic. And I always thought this was the biggest thing missing from Stoicism discussion is we have kind of Stoicism for people who have never learned it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about sages. And there's like very little discussion or development of this kind of painful in-between development process where we're trying to become better people. And I think that understanding of the dichotomy of control helps explain what that process is supposed to look like.
Yeah, the Stoics sometimes say we're either virtuous or we're vicious, or we're one or the other. But I did read in Seneca the other day where he talks about how at least when you start cultivating wisdom, life becomes bearable. So there's some recognition there of this progress towards the goal, even though you haven't arrived to your destination. And I like when we read about those analogies comparing life to a voyage and things like that, because you don't arrive instantly. It's a process. And I think it's easy to forget that when you're judging yourself and looking at yourself. Do you think journaling is a good way to see how your garden's doing? What do we do to ensure we're moving? We don't have a switch to be in control of our anger. Let's say we get angry easily. What are some steps do you think that we could take that would fit this paradigm of the, I don't know what to call it other than the dichotomy of control for now.
Great. So one thing I look at in Epictetus is the actual exercises that he recommends, and how he recommends people progress. Journaling is definitely one of them. I would say just in general, I don't know if mindfulness is the right term, but I would say, beginning to recognize your thought processes and your habits and your dispositions. I was thinking of this in a medical analogy of kind of just like, it's just an evaluation. So you're kind of looking like, where is the injury? Okay, it's in my ankle. Well, is it sprained or is it broken? Okay, well, it looks to be, I can't put weight on it. It looks to be broken. The first step, I think, is just to figure out, how your brain works, what kind of things tend to upset you, how your self-talk tends to work, non-judgmentally, just this kind of diagnosis process. And I don't personally journal, but I think journaling can be very helpful for that. I think because I'm a bit of an overthinker, so I think I get the thoughts going without having to write them down. And that's great. And then one thing Epictetus does is he recommends a couple things. If you identify something, let's say you're quick to anger, he says, one, you should dedicate your training disproportionately towards where you're weak. So if you're the kind of person that gets angry, it's like it's not rocket science, but you should identify that is the thing you should be working on and not avoid it or not work on or delay the progress. And the other thing he recommends is, at least at the start, which I think is kind of interesting because it's about making use of our environment. He recommends trying to avoid situations that entrench or further develop this bad habit. Okay. So if you're quick to anger, spend less time around the kinds of people and situations that cause you to get in this position. And I find this is kind of, I think, comes off from this idea of control. If people say, well, my anger's in my control, and then they let themselves kind of stay in the same environment. They say, well, if I fail, it's my fault because I should have control over this. Epictetus actually recommends the opposite, which is, if you're the kind of person that does something they don't want to do, like remove yourself from the kind of things that cause these situations, calm down, study, journal, work on these things, and then reintroduce these things to your life slowly. Because this is this idea that Epictetus is allowing to introduce and is in other Stoics as well, but this idea of habituation of bad character traits and dispositions of like I'm quick to get angry, I'm quick to be jealous, or I'm quick to get anxious. And these things get worse the more we do them.
Mm-hmm.
So we recognize that I should be trying to minimize the amount of times this happens. And then once I'm kind of in a strong point, then reintroduce the things that used to upset me and be like, wow, okay, I'm better at this now. But don't just throw yourself against it when you're just starting. I think that's a mistake.
Slamming your head against the wall is not the proper technique.
Right? Because not only is it ineffective, but Epictetus is going to argue it's actually going to make you worse, right? If you're and that's that we know that in contemporary psychology, right? It's about it's kind of exposure therapy, which is within your comfort zone, right? It's no help exposing yourself to the things that upset you or like inflame your emotions and your passions if they're taking control of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a small enough dose that you can handle it.
Great. Now, when we talk about, so we know that the things that are that we're capable of cultivating, that are our responsibility to cultivate,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean we can instantly achieve them, but they are something we can work on. How do we approach that other category of control, the things we have some influence on? How do we approach that from a proper Stoic perspective? I always think of the Stoic archer example. What's the approach to that, and how might we approach it the wrong way, and what's the correct way to approach situations like that?
Yeah, so the situation is, Epictetus says once we've got control over ourselves in terms of like what's up to us, we don't want to just be unfeeling like a statue. We want to maintain proper relationships with our friends, our families, our city, our government, whatever
Mm-hmm.
our job in this case. So these things are important to the Stoics. So you raised the archer example, and I think that's a great one, and it's one that I really agree with, which is this idea that the archer aims at a target, but their true goal is to aim well, right? So once you let go of that arrow, a pigeon flies in front of it, the wind pushes it away. Your job is to calculate and take into account all of these things as well as possible, and then try to maintain equanimity if it doesn't hit that target. That doesn't prevent you from aiming. It doesn't prevent you from attempting to aim well. Epictetus talks about this as like kind of reserve clause.
Mm-hmm.
I will do X, God willing, like if it's fated for me. And by having that kind of reserve clause in place, you remember that you don't. It's not up to you whether or not this outcome occurs. Yeah, so I want to try to maybe analogize that or something, but the idea is what really matters in life, or what we should focus on the most, is what is up to us. We care about other things,
Mm-hmm.
but we recognize that now that they've extended beyond that domain of being what is up to us, we don't have the ability to determine them. And to treat them like they're things that we determine is to misunderstand what they are. And to misunderstand what they are is to make a mistake. So that to me makes sense. This picture of like, always treat a thing like it is. So if you're engaging with another person, always treat them like another person who has separate thoughts, separate history, separate beliefs. And that person, things might go well. You might have a good friendship or relationship, or things might go poorly, but it's not up to you how they feel and are disposed towards you. I think that helps. That for me, at least, is a really good framework of it, is remembering what type of thing it is. And that it's not a thing that you determine.
And I think it gets harder for me as a parent
Mm-hmm.
to understand, how do you apply this? Because if you're trying to talk to somebody about Epictetus or Stoicism and you're not sure how to put it all together, you don't want to say, well, my son is nothing to me, because that's not what he says, but it can feel that way or read that way if you're not sure how to put these different layers of philosophy together in the right way. So what is it that is nothing to me? And the thing, say to yourself, it is nothing to me. What is, like, my son, like my son's behavior is something that I cannot control, as it were. I
Mhm.
might have some influence on, but let's say I'm embarrassed of something he does in a restaurant. Uh,
Yeah.
I could say, well, like that's nothing to me, or is my son the noun nothing to me? What is nothing to me? What is the Epictetus approach here?
So I can't remember the exact passage, but I think the way off the top of my head that I would interpret that, there's a claim about value, right? Like it's nothing to me, so it has no value. And we want to avoid that. I think it's helpful if we emphasize the me. So it is nothing to me. And again, I don't know the exact passage, but a way that I would
Right.
go about thinking about this, it is not a part of me, right? So your son's behavior in a restaurant, as hard as that can be to make that attachment, is not a part of you. It is not a direct result of you. Obviously, you have some sort of influence of that, strong influence, but it's a combination of other things, about the most important part being the character of your not the character, but your child as a individual person separate from you, who has impulses and desires and interests, and maybe the interest is to color, get up, or scream or cry at that particular inopportune time. Um, and that behavior is not a part of you. It's not you. Um, it it matters in so much as you care for and want to um, love and help this person, but it is not you. What you are is your responses, your behavior, your way of helping that problem, or causing that problem to become worse. And I think moving away from the nothing, like, oh, my loved ones don't matter, to my loved ones are not me. Their behavior, their feelings about me are not representative of who I am. They're representative of their person.
Okay. Yeah, it's just sometimes you read it and you're like, this could be interpreted
Mhm.
probably the wrong way as a very harsh thing, or there's probably more nuance here than I'm picking up from a single paragraph. So
Do you have the passage of Epictetus in mind? I don't want to nerd out too much, but I
you
just
don't.
I
Well, let me look here. I that just came to me off the top of my head. So
because I know he has that brutal passage where he says that kiss your child on the forehead at night and say you too will die when you tuck them into bed, and that's always like everyone's always like whoa. Um, but that one is about understanding what the thing you love is, or the person you love is, and understanding the person you love is a mortal thing.
yeah,
Um,
and I think I mean we're just as mortal as people were then, but back then the
mhm.
odds of your children passing away during your lifetime were greatly enhanced, and I'm sure that that's something you may
That's a
well
great point.
experience.
I never thought of that. That just the number of parents who had their children die was just substantially higher. Um,
Okay, it looks like Discourse is 316, maybe.
Great. I'll pull it up here. I
You
don't
are
mean
on the
to.
ball, man.
I like my Epictetus. So, hmm.
At least that's what
Maybe I
happens
could.
when I Google it here. But it could have come up in the context of like dropping a cup as well. Like, say it's just a cup. Say it, and but I'm going to flag this part here so that way I remember if we want to edit out us Googling things, we can do that. This is 132, about 32 in. Okay.
Yeah. So we do have something here, right? This is the end of 316. Epictetus. How do I deal with these impressions that present themselves to me in accordance with nature or contrary to it? How shall I respond to them? As I should or as I shouldn't? Do I declare to those things that lie outside the sphere of choice that they mean nothing to me? For if you have yet to achieve that frame of mind, flee from laymen if you ever want to begin to be somebody. So flee from laymen. So the idea is that if you're not correctly distanced from externals yet, and you submerge yourself in that world, it's just gonna destroy your character because you're gonna be too attached. I mean, I'm sticking with that reading, but I'll go back over it about this being, because Epictetus clearly says that these things matter. We have an important way of respecting our relationship to them, and we do something wrong if we don't fulfill our role as a parent, as a father, as a member of a city. But I think there's nothing to you in the fact that they are not a part of you. They're not indicative of you, and them going better or worse doesn't make you a better or worse person, right? So there's this, I can have this conception of external things where, like, if I'm poor, if I lost my job, that means I'm like a worthless person. I've just become worse. If everybody hates me, I've just become a worse person. There's a way of looking at these things as being something that changes the quality of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And Epictetus is going to think that we should, obviously love and have proper relationships with people, but they don't change the quality of our quality. External situations don't change who we are.
So it's like you said, when you read it one way, it can sound like, well, you are not me, so you are nothing to me. But it's
Mm-hmm.
more nuanced than that.
I would hope so.
I would hope so as well. But I just know how sometimes it can seem when you're especially if you're reading for the first time, like you said, that
Mm-hmm.
that passage about kiss your child. Someone might say, "Boy, that's cold," but there's it's a philosophical text. We have to keep that in mind. It's like I said, the way I interpret it is, first of all, it's true, even if it doesn't feel good. And second of all, at that time, the odds of your child not making it through the night are probably greatly elevated from where the amazing world we live in today. So, but yeah, I appreciate that article about the I don't know what the dichotomy of influence. I don't know. We need something catchy now.
Yeah, it is super catchy, and that's why it's stuck and it stayed. And I was trying to even find the first person that translated it as that. It's helpful. It is helpful to have something catchy in that first level, and we're lacking that. I'm thinking more about this passage we just talked about things being nothing to us, and I just want to come back to it one more time.
Sure, go ahead.
Because it can be a rough idea if we start with things like my child.
Right.
The ultimate level of understanding, right? Hopefully would be you to have a correct level of attachment to your child without being overly attached. That's like the highest, that's like the sage level, right? But even if you think of something like your body, right? So you think, I was just thinking about, let's say you become, you have some sort of accident, or you lose something, or you lose a hand. It's not appropriate to like mutilate your hand when you're healthy, or like hurt your body unnecessarily. But this kind of idea of like, my body has just been harmed. Is that something to me? Like, have I become a worse person? Have I become worse because I've developed, some sort of disability or something? And it's very empowering to be like, no, that is not indicative of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
This thing that's external to you. That's just your body, but who you are is that character and that choice. That I think makes more sense because we're bracketing for a moment the really emotionally sticky questions of family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a statement like that is not at all difficult. So I was just I was pulling that one out of my head, and I just wanted to.
Well, that's the joy of talking to someone who thinks deeply about these things. It's there are no canned answers when it comes to philosophy. You're applying ideas to new situations all the time, right? And wrestling with them, as it were, like how does this apply to this new situation? And it's great to see that live on the podcast as well. Like, wait a minute, let's talk about that some more. And I appreciate that.
That's great.
So what's I wanted to ask, we talked briefly before the show, but I was going to ask on the show. So you're working on this thesis, you're reading these sources, and you're doing it in the original Greek, is that correct?
So most of the time, the way the process works is I'll read it and I'll be like, I've done about the equivalent of 5 years of coursework in Greek now, and
Wow.
I'll read it in English and I'll be like, that's interesting, like what's going on here, and then I'll go to the Greek. It's not quite, Greek's pretty hard. It's not quite the point where I can pull it open and read it
Just
like a normal book.
Light your pipe and go, oh yes, I see what this is.
I want to be that way. And it's a little bit easier with Epictetus because I've read it in English so many times. So when you go to the Greek, you know what's happening.
Uh-huh.
But that's crucial, right? Because even in a lot of the work that I do as like a scholar is, let's say Epictetus uses a certain word. The translator who's not being, because the translator has to translate the entire book, right? They're
Right.
not being as careful. They might translate that word a different way a couple times. But then if you go to the Greek, you realize, no, he's talking about the same thing in different passages, right? And then all of a sudden that helps, and you get this new connection, this new idea that you couldn't if you were using the translation, right? Things like that are really fun and helpful. And then another thing, like the project I just did here, it was just something that most people don't have, which is most people are just reading English. They see control and they run with it. When you go to the Greek, the word control just isn't there, right? So it's communicating
It's
something.
like, oh, this is a translation issue more than what's written in the original text.
It's already being run through a filter, right? And it's just the name of the game that's just going to happen. But not everyone has the time or the luxury to learn Greek, or the interest even, but just an awareness that it's already being run through the filter of somebody else. And that filter, if you pull out 3 or 4 different translations, is sometimes quite a heavy one, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's sometimes quite a bit of difference. I know that, and I noticed that most in Marcus Aurelius, the difference between those translations. Yeah, so that's the way the project works. I kind of read some Epictetus. I think that's interesting. I pull it up and dig into it in the Greek and see if I can find something different or interesting or new from what other people have said.
So it applied in this case. Have there been times when you've had a aha moment and your understanding changed because you went to the Greek? Obviously, this particular discussion was influenced by that, but or the English translations usually ballpark enough where the Greek gives you maybe a little clearer picture, but not like oh, that's what he meant.
Oh, that's a great question. I have to. I'm sure there's a lot of points for that. Off the top of my head, nothing's coming. Maybe if something comes up.
It's just interesting to, people have been doing this with the Bible for a long time, trying to read it in the original and saying, oh, I get more out of it and I see things from a different perspective, having this ability. But I'm sure that being able to go to that Greek and saying, well, what if this word actually translates as this instead? or this word has 2 meanings and they went with this one. What if it's this one?
Let me think of it. Like off the top of my head, I'm sure I could think about it more if I had a bit more time.
No, yeah.
One thing that Epictetus is really interested in is preconceptions. So a preconception, I'm not sure if you've talked about this before, but a preconception basically is this innate understanding of the value of certain certain concepts, certain kinds of categories. So we understand, everybody shares the preconception of good and bad. We all know that we want good things, we pursue good things. We all know that we want to avoid bad things and that they're harmful. Mm-hmm. And then Epictetus says, what an education is preconceptions are great, but what education is categorizing things into these preconceptions properly. So it's not other people out here like, oh, I hate good things. Nobody says that. They just think, oh, it's good to steal. It's good to get what you want, even if it means hurting other people. It's a categorization mistake. And I don't know. And then one thing with the Greek that was fun for me is like, so preconception is prolepsis, and pro is before, and lepsis is grasp. So it's like our grasp before we've thought about it. It's like a pre-grasp of the idea. And then when we've firmly assented to something, we understand something to be true, it's a catalepsis. And so it's instead of a prolepsis, it's catalepsis. So it's a grasp. Well, kata is like thorough, right? So it's like we've grasped through the idea. And it's these same kind of ideas and these combinations of different words. And you think, oh, well, like, I don't think of like firm assent as being the same thing as preconception, but we're working with the same Greek here. One is just a pre-grasp, and then the other is like a thorough grasp of an idea.
That kind of reminds me of what they talk about Zeno using hand signals, where knowledge and wisdom, or whatever it was, where you really grasp it thoroughly when you're like at the sage level or whatever. Yeah, that's really interesting.
It is exactly that. As catalepsis is that thorough grasp. And then I'm trying to think of other things, but just things like little things like this that connect ideas in an interesting way, right? Like prohairesis, like Epictetus talks all the time about prohairesis, and it's like, what the heck is that? You know, your faculty of choice. What does that even mean? But hyro is just to choose. So the pro-hyro is just it's the pre-choice. It's the things you do before you make a decision. And just little insights like this really help the concepts.
Give a little clarity to the meaning of these things. Yeah, that's great.
I'm nerding out on this, but I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, you can work out, if nothing else, for all of us who don't have the time or the inclination to learn Greek, we need like a Stoic thesaurus or something.
Yeah. And then, it's really cool. And then when other people are talking about these things, you know, different authors are using the same Greek word. They're talking about the same thing, but somebody who doesn't, two different people translated Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca and Cicero. So now they're talking about the same technical word, but it might have been translated in different ways. And again, that's cool. It's connecting those dots and those pieces.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Michael, is there anything else you want to mention before we call it a day? Is there any upcoming things we should look for, or anything you want to mention?
I don't really have anything to plug on my end or anything. I just really appreciate the time. And if you're interested in anything more, I have a website where I have more of my talks on. You can come see those, or other podcasts that I do, and a couple blog posts about ideas. I just think that if you're progressing through like if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already, you know, Stoicism is a bit of a hobby. It's a bit of a thing you enjoy doing. And I just encourage this, what I try to do with the blog post, but if something seems weird, don't be afraid to question it and like try to figure it out deeper. Because while the Stoics were not necessarily right about everything, it was, these things were thoroughly thought about. So if something seems immediately wrong, there might be something more to it. And I think that process of digging into it can be really rewarding.
That's great advice. Thank you, Michael, and look forward to talking with you soon. Good luck on that defense.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care. Carpe diem.